Hi everyone. Okay, I'm here to read you the next couple of chapters from George's Marvellous Medicine. Now, the last couple of chapters that I read to you, we found out that Mr. Killiecranky was very excited about this medicine. He wasn't angry, and he had this amazing idea that George should make some more of it so that he can then sell it on to other people, maybe other farmers. So what they did was they gathered all the ingredients that George used in the first medicine to make medicine number 2. But if you remember, George actually forgot a few of those things that he added to his first medicine, he's forgotten to do for his second medicine. I wonder if you've thought about that and maybe can remember some of the things that he should have added but didn't. If you did, brilliant. See if you were right. So as I read the next chapter, see if it lets you know if you were right or not. Okay? All right, so let's carry on then. So this chapter is called Marvellous Medicine number 2. They were in the kitchen now, and the big saucepan was on the stove. All the things Mr. Cranky had bought were lined up near the sink. "Come along, my dear boy," cried Mr. Killiecranky. "Which one did you put in first?" This one," George said. "Golden Gloss Hair Shampoo." He emptied the bottle into the pan. "Now the toothpaste," George went on, "and the shaving soap, and the face cream, and the nail varnish." "Keep at it, my boy," cried Mr. Cranky, dancing around the kitchen. "Keep putting them in. Don't stop, don't pause, don't hesitate. It's a pleasure, my dear fellow, just to watch you work." And one by one, George poured and squeezed the things into the saucepan. With everything so close at hand, the whole job didn't take him more than 10 minutes. But when it was all done, the saucepan didn't somehow seem to be quite as full as it had been the first time. "Now, what did you do?" cried Mr. Cranky. "Did you stir it?" "I boiled it," George said, "but not for long, and I stirred it as well." So Mr. Cranky lit the gas under the saucepan, and George stirred the mixture with the same long wooden spoon he had used before. It's just not brown enough," George said. Oh, wait a minute. I know what I've forgotten." "What?" cried Mr. Cranky. "Tell me, quick, because if we've forgotten even just one tiny thing, then it won't work. At least, not in the same way." "A quart of brown gloss paint," George said. "That's what I've forgotten." Mr. Killiecranky shot out of the house and into his car like a rocket. He sped down to the village and bought the paint and rushed back again. He opened the can in the kitchen and handed it to George. George poured the paint into the saucepan. "Aha! Oh, yeah, that's much better," George said. "That's more like the right colour." "It's boiling," cried Mr. Cranky. "It's boiling and bubbling, George. Is he ready yet?" "It's ready," George said. "At least I hope it is." "Right," shouted Mr. Cranky, hopping about. "Let's test it. Let's give some to a chicken." "My heavens alive! Why don't you calm down a bit?" Mrs. Cranky said, coming into the kitchen. "Calm down?" cried Mr. Cranky. "You expect me to calm down? And here we are mixing up the greatest medicine ever discovered in the history of the world. Come along, George. Dip a cupful out of the saucepan and get a spoon, and we'll give some to a chicken, just to make absolutely certain we've got the correct mixture." Outside in the yard, there were several chickens that hadn't had any of George's Marvellous Medicine number 1. They were pecking about in the dirt in that silly way chickens do. George crouched down, holding out a spoonful of Marvellous Medicine number 2. "Come on, chicken," he said. "Good chicken. Chick, chick, chick." A white chicken with black specks on its feathers looked up at George. It walked over to the spoon and went peck. The effect that medicine number 2 had on this chicken was not quite the same effect that was produced by medicine number 1, but it was very interesting. "Whoosh!" shrieked the chicken, and it shot 6 feet up in the air and came down then again. Then sparks came flying out of its beak, bright yellow sparks of fire, as though someone was sharpening a knife on a grindstone inside its tummy. Then its legs began to grow longer. Its body stayed the same size, but the 2 thin yellow legs got longer and longer and longer and longer still. "What's happening to it?" cried Mr. Killiecranky. "Something's wrong," George said. The legs went on growing, and the more they grew, the higher up into the air went the chicken's body. And when the legs were about 15 feet long, they stopped growing. The chicken looked perfectly absurd with its long, long legs and its ordinary little body perched high up on top. It was like a chicken on stilts. "Oh, my sainted aunts!" cried Mr. Killiecranky. "We've got it wrong! This chicken's no good to anybody. It's all legs. No one wants chicken legs." "I must have left something out," George said. "I know you left something out," cried Mr. Killiecranky. "Think, boy, think. What is it that you've left out?" Have a look at the picture of the chicken. It's really no good. "Oh, I've got it," said George. "Well, what is it? Quick!" "Flea powder for dogs," George said. "You mean you put flea powder in the first one?" "Yes, Dad, I did. A whole carton of it." "Then that's the answer." "Wait a minute," said George. "Did we have brown shoe polish on our list?" "We did not," said Mr. Killiecranky. "Well, I used that too," said George. "Well, no wonder it went wrong," said Mr. Cranky. He was already running to his car, and soon he was heading down to the village to buy more flea powder and more shoe polish. Okay, so they're going to try the next medicine. So this is the new chapter called Marvellous Medicine number 3. "Here it is," cried Mr. Killiecranky, rushing into the kitchen. "1 carton of flea powder for dogs and 1 tin of brown shoe polish." George poured the flea powder into the giant saucepan, and then he scooped the shoe polish out of its tin and added that in as well. "Stir it up, George," shouted Mr. Cranky. "Give it another boil. We've got it this time. I'll bet we've got it." After Marvellous Medicine number 3 had been boiled and stirred, George took a cupful out into the yard to try it on another chicken. Mr. Cranky ran after him, flapping his arms and hopping with excitement. "Come and watch this one," he called out to Mrs. Cranky. "Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one that lays eggs as large as footballs." "Oh, I hope you do better than the last time," said Mrs. Cranky, following them out. "Come on, chicken," said George, holding out a spoonful of medicine number 3. "Good chicken. Chick, 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 chick. Have some lovely medicine." A magnificent black cockerel with a scarlet comb came stepping over. The cockerel looked at the spoon and it went peck. "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" squawked the cockerel, shooting up into the air and coming down again. "Watch him now!" cried Mr. Cranky. "Watch him grow! Any moment he's going to start getting bigger and bigger." Mr. Killiecranky, Mrs. Cranky and little George stood in the yard staring at the black cockerel. The cockerel stood quite still. It looked as though it had a headache. "What's happening to its neck?" Mrs. Cranky said. "Oh, it's getting longer," George said. "I'll say it's getting longer," Mrs. Cranky said. Mr. Cranky, for once, said nothing. "Last time it was the legs," Mrs. Cranky said. "Now it's the neck. Who wants a chicken with a long neck? You can't eat a chicken's neck." It was an extraordinary sight. The cockerel's body hadn't grown at all, but the neck was now about 6 feet long. There you go. Look how silly he looks. All right, George, Mr. Cranky said. What else have you forgotten? I don't know, George said. Oh, yes, you do, Mr. Cranky said. Come along, boy. Think. There's probably just one vital thing missing, and you've got to remember it. Oh, I put some engine oil from the garage, George said. Did you have that on your list? Eureka! Cried Mr. Cranky. That's the answer. How much did you put in? Half a pint, George said. Mr. Cranky ran to the garage and found another half pint of oil. And some antifreeze, George called after him. I sloshed in a bit of antifreeze. Okay, let's see if he gets it right this time. This is Marvellous Medicine number 4. Back in the kitchen once again, George, with Mr. Cranky watching him anxiously, tipped half a pint of engine oil and some antifreeze into the giant saucepan. Boil it up again, cried Mr. Cranky. Boil it up and stir it. George boiled it and stirred it. You'll never get it right, said Mrs. Cranky. Don't forget, you just don't have to have the same things, but you've got to have exactly the same amounts of those things, and how can you possibly do that? You keep out of this, cried Mr. Cranky. We're doing fine. We've got it this time. You see if we haven't. This was George's Marvellous Medicine number 4, and when it had boiled for a couple of minutes, George once again carried a cupful of it into the yard. Mr. Cranky ran after him. Mrs. Cranky followed more slowly. You're going to have some mighty queer chickens around here if you go on like this, she said. Dish it out, George, cried Mr. Cranky. Give a spoonful to that one over there. He pointed to a brown hen. George knelt down and held out the spoon with the new medicine in it. Chick, chick, he said. Try some of this. The brown hen walked over and looked at the spoon, and then it went peck. Ouch, it said. Then a funny whistling noise came out of its beak. Watch it grow, shouted Mr. Cranky. Don't be too sure, said Mrs. Cranky. Why is it whistling like that? Oh, keep quiet, woman, cried Mr. Cranky. Give it a chance. And they stood there staring at the brown hen. Oh, it's getting smaller, George said. Look at it. It's shrinking. And indeed it was. In less than a minute, the hen had shrunk so much it was no bigger than a new hatched chick. It looked ridiculous. Okay. We'll stop there. We've got one more chapter to go, but I think we'll save that one for a little bit later. So, they've had another 3 goes of this medicine, and still it hasn't worked. So he's obviously forgotten one more thing, or maybe a couple of things. So, were you right? Did you remember the right things that he'd forgotten? I don't know. Hope you did. Now, I wonder, the next chapter is all about Grandma. So, and that will end the story. I wonder why the next chapter is about Grandma. Do you think that they're going to do something with this medicine to Grandma? If so, what's going to happen to Grandma? I don't know. Have a think. Maybe you've got an idea. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I know I certainly did. And I can't wait to end this story with you. I've really enjoyed being able to read the story. And I hope that you've enjoyed it too. Have a lovely, lovely day. Take care of yourselves, okay? And we'll see each other again very soon to finish off this brilliant book. Until then, take care, and I'll see you soon. See you guys. Bye.